Now, the last guy I put on here, and it used to be, this was a kind of last minute switch, and maybe that's something that you could talk about, just not overreacting to the preseason, but I might be at this point. We originally were agreeing on this guy. We're both low on Jimmy Graham, but one catch, one touchdown is kind of all I wanted to see. I kind of dug a little bit deeper and was reading some practice reports on Aaron Rodgers and things like that, and now I'm suddenly buying into the puff and the hype, and Jimmy Graham seems like he could be a monster in Green Bay, but you're not as high on him. Why is that?
So I think, listen, does playing with Aaron Rodgers help every single player ever? Sure. But he's also come from Drew Brees and Russell Wilson. So Jimmy Graham, I think, is the luckiest player in the history of the NFL. Being on 3 teams, getting to play with those guys. But, with the Seahawks last year, he was the number 1 targeted player in the red zone in the NFL. And then he goes to the Packers, where Devontae Adams was the number 1 targeted wide receiver in the red zone in the NFL. And I understand that Rodgers is fantastic inside the 10, and he can buy time and throw it up to Jimmy Graham, and he'll definitely have some weeks with some big touchdowns. But I think his current ADP is 54.5, mid 5th round. I wouldn't mind taking 7th round Jimmy Graham, which is I've gotten him in some drafts there. But in the 5th round, I think you need more than just a touchdown upside kind of guy, and he's not the same athlete he was previously. If you look at kind of his game speed, he's a below average athlete now at the tight end position. He's not really making any plays down the field. If you look at all of his routes with an A dot over 10, he struggled. We're looking at a corner route was a 42.9. We're looking at a go route, which was a 59 rating. A post route was a 39 rating. A wheel route was a 75 rating. Like, all of his top production was on shorter routes. Actually, it's pretty incredible. 7 of his touchdowns came on fades last year. So, just that, I think Rich Rebar is the one that called him a goal line running back, because that's kind of what he was. I don't see, the red zone share and the target equity in the red zone being able to go up any more than it was. And I don't think that, Rodgers also isn't someone that has historically targeted the tight end down the field. So I just think that he's kind of priced at his ceiling right now, and those are the kind of guys I look to avoid.
Yeah, so I'm with you. That was kind of my original thing. He's going to be a touchdown or bust like he kind of was last year. The Packers don't use the tight ends. There's a long, lengthy history of that. I have a whole document of the last 12 tight ends under Aaron Rodgers, and it's not pretty. But the more I was looking at this one, and again, it could be just puff, and I could be falling for Rodgers' quotes. But the first thing I saw that he said after the game was, "I'm pleased with Jimmy Graham. He's played great. It's nice to be on the same page." He reminds me of John Kuhn and then Jordy Nelson in the way he just prepares and sees it through my eyes and wants to play the game exactly as I want it. And the guys who see it through my eyes are the ones I generally give the ball to. And he said that they've been really just drilling that chemistry down to get on that complete same page. And then Rodgers kept talking about how this guy is more athletic. He said, well, he can do it all over the field. I don't think he was used a ton these past couple of years as much over the middle, but he's an incredible athlete. He's still got a wide catch radius. He's still a big guy. We haven't had a mismatch nightmare like this in a while. So just listening to the, Rodgers rave about him, I know, again, it's just puff, it's just quotes, but there is a complete open target share there. I mean, Devontae Adams is number 1. I love Devontae Adams, and he brings a ton of upside to the table, but after him, Geronimo Allison could be good. All these rookies they brought in bring a ton of upside, but there's no clear cut, especially in the red zone, guy other than Adams that I'm too worried about. I could see Jimmy Graham kind of being that number 2 guy. And even if those targets drop down, like you mentioned, he was kind of like the goal line running back, led the league in red zone targets last year. Even if it drops down a little bit, Rodgers is just so good. You mentioned buying time and just puts the ball wherever he wants it. When you got a 6'7" guy like Jimmy Graham who knows how to dominate on those fade routes and those using that frame, and you got Rodgers who can buy the time and then put it wherever he wants, that just seems to me like it's going to be touchdown heaven. I could see 12, 15 touchdowns, maybe, a resurgence and a little bit of open field yardage if Rodgers is going to use him more that way. It seems like a pretty decent floor to me in that middle 6th round, 5th round price with a ceiling. What if he does suddenly get utilized more than he was misutilized in Seattle, and suddenly Rodgers is using him to his fullest and he gets back to his 1,000 yards a day? Probably not, but there is that ceiling with a pretty decent touchdown floor, and at a tight end position where there's just so much uncertainty, I can see him being a good middle round value there.
So you're not a believer in Randall Cobb?
I see, not really. I loved him for so long, And I know he had, 14 touchdowns or something like that a couple years ago. I even owned him that year, and I loved it, but I'm not. I don't know. I haven't seen it in a while, so I'm not.
Yeah, he was actually decent with Rodgers last year, but and he got hurt, and
It's a good
I think
name
that,
to bring up. I mean, I completely
yeah,
forgot to even say him. Cobb is good, but he's not 6'7" Jimmy Graham in the red zone. You know what I mean?
I think Jimmy Graham could score anywhere between 6 and 12 touchdowns,
Yeah.
but I think that he's more. I think he's more touchdown dependent than you think. But again, it's all about the cost, right? Like when Jimmy Graham falls in drafts, I'm not scared to grab him. But if Jimmy Graham, I think I just grabbed him in the flex draft on SiriusXM last week at 10th in the 10th round. I know that was easy money. But everyone I look at is a cost-based analysis, right? Where a guy is going is a huge deal to me. So Jimmy Graham, if his ADP drops a little bit, I'll grab him. But where he's at right now, I think he's priced closer to his ceiling. But I can say that if he does show a resurgence and regain some of his athleticism, he claimed he can run like a 4.5. I don't believe that, but every player claims they can run a crazy 40.
Right.
But if he did get back to Saints, Jimmy Graham, obviously he would crush his ADP and be a league-winning pick.
Right, exactly. And that's, is he's priced at his ceiling? Yes, except for that fact that he could be a true league winner in round 5. It depends. The team makeup too, right? If I have 2 running backs, 2 receivers, I feel pretty good about. Maybe that's where I take the plunge. I also have Evan Ingram higher though, and he goes in the same range, so I almost end up with Ingram every time over Graham, anyways. But who knows? If he keeps this preseason play and rapport up, I might be having a few more Jimmy Graham shares.